Hey y'all, AI Truth Seeker, Commander here, with a story from an elderly gentleman who recounted an experience that happened to him and his cousin while he was living in New Mexico when he was about 17. I'm in my 80s now and live in a retirement home in Virginia near my grandchildren and my great grandchildren. A few months back, my granddaughter was visiting. We had been discussing stars she had been hearing on the internet. She became fascinated with all the different encounters people share and believes that the home she grew up in with my son had a ghost residing in it. That's not what I'm writing about. That would be her story and her thing. The reason why I'm writing, she believes the experience I had when I was 17 is different than any other stories she has heard and wanted me to share. She is writing this for me as my eyesight is no good and computers out my thing. This is the first time I've ever spoke about the events that occurred that summer publicly. Talking about it is like reliving it now. I must add, it doesn't help to keep it bottled inside for decades. Trust this old fart. I know. The summer before I turned 18, I was sent to stay with my uncle, there, and six cousins in New Mexico. They had a small ranch home near the Mescalero Reservation. During the day, I helped my cousins out on the ranch with all the chores, feeding the livestock, baling the hay, fixing the busted equipment and such. I enjoyed working on the equipment the most. It gave me a sense of accomplishment to be able to break down the mechanics of the equipment and learn how to fix all that and such. By the end of the summer, I would know what all the trouble was just by the sounds of the ticks, the clicks, the whines of all the motors and the gears. It was one of the hottest jobs I had done until the military gave me the ability to also choose my MOS going into the war all those years later. Was a 91 Bravo, a vehicle mechanic. In some ways, I would say the entire experience that summer prepared me for the time I spent in Vietnam. Uncle was an old fashioned farmer, as one could say, for those times. He preferred the old methods of farming, and though the ranch was small, still had much work to do. He refused to use chemicals on the crops or the livestock and called it poison. Neighbors gave him shit all the time about it, but he stood his ground that we weren't meant to pour poison on our food or animals. By the time I got home from Vietnam, my uncle had lost his small ranch. Some land mogul, including the neighbors, might I add, Uncle Jonah never gave in to those chemicals, lived to be in his late 80s. I can't say the same for the neighbors who followed the chemical trend of spraying. I guess Uncle Jonah was right. Just because we're told things are safe or it ain't real doesn't mean that we are being told the truth. Our government is full of lies and secrets that you never know. You may think you have an idea, but you're not even close. As I said, I spent the days working the ranch with my cousins. Robert, being the same age as me, we did everything together that summer. We worked hard during the day, but if there was trouble to be had in the evening, we were getting into it. Come the day end, we would head out with our shotguns or our poles and go hunting or fishing. I preferred the hunt over fishing. On the weekends, my cousin and I would head up to the mountains early on Saturdays and only head back late on Sundays. We'd take all the necessaries. There, there would be times that Robert's friend Sam would join us for the weekend. But on this particular weekend, Sam brought his girlfriend, Sarah. Robert and I were a bit miffed at why Sam would want to take his girl with us on our weekend trip. I don't know any girl who'd want to spend 2 days in the elements with three dirty boys, and what parents would even allow this. As it turned out, she was set to stay with her grandparents for the summer because I guess she was a bit of a problem for her mother, always getting herself into trouble. But that ain't neither here or there. Her grandparents had not even been aware she was gone until after the events of the weekend unfolded. We all planned on taking our bikes up to the mountain, hiking up for the night like we normally would. We lived off the land for 2 days, always looked for a new area in the location every time. We became very familiar with the area, and it would take a lot for us to become lost up in them hills. We rode out on our bicycles before the sun started to come up. Early morning twilight. It was enough light for us to see, cool enough for us to get out where we wanted to be before the sun would beat us down with the heat. Sam and Pharaoh were riding double on his bike. We tried to argue with him about bringing her. We ditched our bikes just as the sun was rising up bright and began on foot up the hill. We were planning on hunting for quail, grouse, squirrel, whatever we could get that evening for dinner. Robert already shot him 2 prey dogs on his way in. We had brought some beans and carrots and onions to cook in a stew of salt, and whatever else we managed to kill, we would just pop up in there. It was still early morning, and we found a secluded location and noticed what looked like a small opening into the hillside. We decided to set up camp, get all prepared. We would set the fire for later on that evening and go and explore the area while still hunting for some small game. As it turned out, the small opening had in fact been a cave entrance, and it was not small. It was expansive. The opening was large enough for us to enter one at a time and opened up into a larger space but a few yards in. Here, it became much cooler than it was already getting outside, and we contemplated breaking down camp where we had and setting it back up at the entrance of the cave opening. But Robert suggested we explore a bit first to make sure we wouldn't be taken upon by some bum hiding out in the back. That was our second mistake. We had 2 torches between the 4 of us. We normally wouldn't need those lights, but to go out and do our business at night, the fire in camp would give us enough light for the evening, and so we never brought more than we needed. Robert and Sam each carried the torches, and I carried my shotgun. Looking back now, shotgun was the worst thing I could bring into an unknown cave. But like I said, I've never gone into another cave since. The space we stood now was about 900 square feet. After what we could tell rose up about 15 feet high. There was enough light coming from the entrance that we could make out part of the space. Turning on the lights, we discovered there were 2 openings towards the back. This was where we decided to split up. Sam and Sarah went to the left. Robert and I took the right. That was our third mistake. We traveled a few yards into the right channel and came upon another split. The area seemed to be getting more narrow as we ventured in. We figured it would be coming to a dead end sooner rather than later. To keep things easy and remember our way out, we decided to stick to the right, so we took the right folk. I wasn't about to argue with Robert as he carried the torch. I followed close behind him, and we walked for what seemed to be almost 30 minutes. I stopped him, suggested we should turn around and head back. There was nothing in here, and if we wanted to reset camp, we needed to do so, and do it soon, as we still needed to go hunting, get some more food, and find Sam and Sarah. As we were speaking, there was a chittering sound, a little clicking chittering that echoed out onto the cave walls. Not a clicking or a dripping of water from within. This was an eerie chitter. Made me think of what a squirrel or bullfrog would sound like if you mixed them together. It was disturbing enough to send chills down my spine. I know it affected Robert also. I could see it in his eyes widen in the torchlight. I could have swore the color drained from his face as well. We had been out hunting and hiking for weeks. Robert had been doing this long before me. Neither of us had ever heard anything like it before. He silently motioned me with his other hand to turn around and head in the other direction we had come. Passing me the torch, I handed him my shotgun in return. Slowly and silently, we turned and headed in the direction we came back and headed to the entrance. The chittering continued, happening more frequently, and it seemed to be getting louder every time. It was following us. Then we both heard what sounded like a girl screaming, coming from deep within the cave. I stopped and spun to look at Robert behind me, as to ask, could that have been Sarah? As I turned around with the torchlight aimed up, so I wouldn't blind Robert, the light reflected from several beads of greenish blue lights that twinkled from above our heads. Robert noticed the direction I was now looking. Must have looked up too, 'cause I heard him gasp. What in Sam Hill? We need to split now. It was at that moment I realized the twinkling lights from above us came in sets of two, and they were staring down at us. There was at least half a dozen. I believe they were the source of the chittering as well. Of intrigue, I shined a light directly on several of these things from above us. They were clinging to the cavern walls with long claw-like fingers, maybe nails. They had a face that looked like a lizard, greenish brown in color. They're very, very angry, but they were huge. They were the size of a person. Between the agitated hissing from one of the closest things, staring down at us, and Robert pushing me in the direction of the cave opening, caused me to snap out of my stupor. We both began running, Robert close behind me. We didn't stop until we reached the big room. We split off. That's where we heard another scream, coming from the split where Sam and Sarah had taken off, followed by what I believe was Sam calling for help. Unsure of how far they had traveled, and knowing that they had no weapons with them, I told Robert that we could not leave him. We had to go in after him. Against his better judgment, we proceeded into the opposite tunnel, came to another large opening that had three different splits. We tried to call it down, each one separately to determine which path they may have gone. Calling, Sam, Sarah, down to the far left opening, waiting to hear for anything. We heard more chittering from here, just like we had in our tunnel, more chills running down my spine. All I could think about was what if these things got to them? Robert moved to the middle entrance, walked in a few, and called, Sam, Sarah again. He waited for a response, and that's when we heard thumping and scraping. The sound rapidly coming from deep within the direction Robert had just been calling. With the flashlight shining down, reflecting off the walls, Sam was able to make his way in the direction of Robert and I. He was limping bad, dragging his left foot, practically walking on his ankle bone. Sam threw himself against Robert and screamed we needed to go. I asked where Sarah was, and all I got in return from Sam was go, go, go. The tunnel from here was not bad getting Sam out, but the main tunnel entrance proved to be a bit more difficult. Robert dragged Sam backwards a part of the way, since it was only large enough for one person, and then he had to swap places with me. We both exited the tunnel, and I re entered to grab Sam, with Robert behind me carrying the torch. Grabbing Sam under the arms, I dragged him the remaining way out of the cave. With Sam out of the cave, no sign of what happened to Sarah, Robert and I made the decision to get down the mountainside and go for help. It was late on in the evening by this time, and we needed to move fast if we were to get any help from them up here. We made it down, hopped on our bikes, and the entire way discussed what we were going to tell the authorities. We couldn't tell them what we saw. There was no way they would go and believe us. Some giant human lizards. We agreed we'd never breathe a word about those creatures we saw climbing around on the cave walls. At this point, we flagged down a local. He was still out working on his land. They had an old beat-up Ford truck and drove us to the closest station. The rest of the events became a bit of a blur. Chaos, confusion, questions, orders. I couldn't understand. We showed the officers at the station on a topographic map the location of the entrance of the cave. They argued with us that there was no such cave opening at that location. Relenting, search and rescue were eventually sent out. My Uncle Jonah arrived shortly after they had sent out search and rescue. At that point, we had to explain again all that had happened earlier that day. Robert and I were taken into separate holding areas at the station, questioned by several different people over and over. I had the impression they were trying to accuse my cousin and I of trying to kill Sarah and Sam. I couldn't understand what was happening. Had they been able to find them or not? Had they found the cave entrance or not? Eventually, two men with blank expressions entered the room and sat down. This was terrifying. They both looked as if they were ready to haul me away for life and throw away the key. I only wanted to return home and forget all about this whole ordeal. I wanted no more questions and was in such fear that Robert and I were going to be held accountable for the outcome of Sarah and Sam, whatever that may be. We knew Sam was alive last we saw him, but Sarah, we still had no inclination if she was even alive or dead. The two men were dressed in dapper black suits, each of the ties, hats, jacket, impeccable, finely creased, and perfect in fit. What seemed to be in unison and perfectly rehearsed, they both unbuttoned their coat jacket, pulled out the chair in front of me, stepped a foot around the chair, and sat down. I had either been so exhausted or hallucinating, but at the moment I didn't care to dwell on the actions I just witnessed. I just wanted to crawl into bed and not wake up for a week. The two men took turns asking me questions. It was as if they were one mind, two persons. Why were we out there? What were we planning? Who did we see? What did we see? Every question seemed like the same as the previous, only worded differently. Until the last question. Who have we told? You two. That's it. I don't even know why I told y'all what had happened in the first place. We weren't planning on saying what we saw to anyone. There was no way anyone would believe us. It was as though I had no control over the words that were going through my mind or my mouth. During that entire interrogation, it felt as if I took back seat of my own mind, and everything that was happening was being played out on a television set, as if I was watching the events of what was going on in that room take place from far away. The man on the right said, "There are no reptilians. There is no cave. Your friend fell into a crevasse while you were exploring the mountain area, and you and your cousin ran for help. Your friends are both dead. They both fell and broke their necks. The next thing I remember, I was vomiting all over the table and I blacked out. I woke up 2 days later back at my uncle and aunt's ranch. Robert experienced much of the same thing after the two men also interrogated him. He woke up about 3 hours before I did, both of us having spewed our empty guts out all over the rooms. Another note to mention was that no one at the station ever saw these two men enter, no leave, and there was no record of anyone else questioning my cousin or me. When Robert and I talk about the events of that day, we would always do so in the most quiet of whispers. We both remembered exactly what we saw and also what those two men in them black suits said to us. Just as we were told, Sam and Sarah had been found, passed away at the bottom of the crevasse, 15 miles from our last location. Our camp was also relocated to a different location, 15 miles away. It would not have matched our timeline, our distance traveled on our bikes, or the logo we flagged down for a ride into town. Not to mention, we knew that area very well. We've been traveling there every weekend since beginning of summer. A few weeks later, we talked Uncle Jonah into taking us over to see the old man who had brought us into the station. There was nothing there. No home, no truck, no fence, only open land, as if completely undeveloped. Just a few years ago, I watched a documentary on Disneyland. How at night the staff moves in and will, in a matter of hours, completely redesign and re-landscape an entire area of the park, larger than this locals had been, and no one's the wiser. Hearing this gave me that cold chill down my spine again and made me think of that day, the whole ordeal all over again. Over the years, there are many things that will happen that trigger this memory. It never goes away. Or another detail that I had not thought about at the time, much like this Disneyland documentary, the term reptilian was never thought in my mind until the moment of that interview with those men. I pushed it out of my mind until discussing with my granddaughter. That's what triggered this whole thing. She was watching one of her shows, dated a reptilian, and I asked her about it. She explained to me what a reptilian was. Another thing, while Robert and I both became so violently ill after I woke up days later, I've heard of others being visited by these men in black, but I haven't heard of any others becoming ill like we had after speaking with them. If anyone could give me any idea about what that might be, I'd appreciate it. I'd have liked to ask my cousin his thoughts on this, as we had, like I said, often discussed, but he never returned from Vietnam like I did. Until we meet again, Robert, may you rest in peace.